Very good morning. I want to start with a simple fact. Some of the biggest data breaches of all time happened this year in 2024, many of which were caused by some of the same security problems we've been dealing with 10 or more years ago. Heather, thank you so much for being here. Why are we still dealing with some of the same security problems as a decade ago?
Well, I think ultimately investment in security can be a hard sell. My hope is that more and more companies lean on the valuable data sets that cyber insurers have, because they really can tell you where you get your biggest bang for the buck when it comes to cybersecurity investment. Top of the list for cyber insurers and these underwriters that write these policies is always MFA. So I think the more we can press the message of like, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck with cybersecurity, the more we'll be able to balance the needs of the business and security.
So Darren, if we are still dealing with some of the same security problems as last decade, what can security teams start to do differently to face today's threats? And what kind of threats are you looking at MongoDB?
Some of the biggest threats I think that we're looking at right now relate to identity. And there's a lot of question about social engineering, and the surface area for that could be a lot larger than you expect, and not just the normal venues for email and texting and other things. It can be any system that interacts with your employees or your customers. And we've seen kind of novel attacks through other venues in which social engineering occurs. And so those are some of the biggest concerns that we have in making sure that humans stay human, and we kind of separate the identities of humans and machine users and things like that. So I think identity and access management is probably top of mind for us.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that's kind of changed in the last 10 years or so, and how maybe things have changed for the better or maybe even for the worse?
I would say that SSO adoption over the past 10 years has been good, and I think that a lot of these companies are doing it right, where they're enforcing SSO on most of their systems, internally and externally. I think the use of phishing-resistant MFA and authorized devices for a company are paramount. So making sure that people are not using their own workstations and phones and things like that, and so that the control of the enterprise over these devices can ensure a certain posture and make sure that someone's not registering a new device, et cetera. So I think that's probably where we go with it.
I want to talk about a major threat today, advanced persistent teenagers, like the cybercrime groups like Scattered Spider. These are highly skilled, financially motivated hackers, teenagers mostly, and young adults. And they've been capable of breaking into hotels and casinos and technology giants over the years. Darren, have we underestimated the threat from bored teenagers?
Maybe not for much longer. I think that they often have a lot of time on their hands. They don't feel as threatened. They may not be in US jurisdictions. And that they tend to be very technical and learn these things in different venues other than kind of traditional computer science education and things. And so they're highly skilled. And if they can use cryptocurrency, it's a huge bug bounty that allows them to sell access to a company and move on, or use it, or just do it for fun. And so it's a different motivation than kind of like the traditional adversaries that enterprises see.
One of the things I find fascinating about the advanced persistent teenager threat is like what we saw with Lapsus Group, and how the motivation was so chaotic. Whether at times their motivation was amusement or notoriety, and then sometimes the financial gain element. They were incredibly unpredictable, and to your earlier point about us still struggling with the same old things at times, they weren't using very highly advanced tactics. They were tricking telecom providers into swapping SIMs and then making phone calls posing as help desk, or doing phishing attempts, taking advantage of non-phish resistant MFA, paying off insiders. Like, these are all human element attacks, and that combined with their unpredictable motivations, I think we have a lot to learn from. I I also want to highlight that for those particular teenagers that they were able to identify, it was identified that they were neurodiverse. Our threat actors, they don't care that you're not good at a mixer. And I think we in cybersecurity need to do a better job at embracing neurodiverse talent as well. And so that's one of the positive human element takeaways that I have from that I just wanted to share.
Of course. And as Marqeta CISO, are you seeing an increased threat from financially motivated actors?
Yeah, so not to speak to Marqeta specifically, but throughout cross verticals, what we're seeing is a lot more focus on things like, for example, the North Korean IT workers, and things like laptop farms, where there is this huge surge of 300 plus companies who have inadvertently been infiltrated by North Korean workers. And so I think the trend that we're seeing is really around insider threat. It's much more easier to manipulate your way in through a person than through hacking in with elaborate malware and exploitation of vulnerabilities. And they're going to keep doing that.
It seems like even though the tools and the techniques have changed somewhat, we still have very much the human factor that we haven't fixed yet. Is that right? So let's go back to way last year, to your employer, Darren. MongoDB had a somewhat limited intrusion. There was no evidence of access to customer systems or databases. For a start, was that attack linked to Scattered Spider?
I think so. We had worked with the FBI and talked to them a bit about it, and I think there was some attribution to that group, but attribution can be hard, right? And so I think there is a certain amount of certainty to it, but the tactics did match up in some of the way that they kind of social engineered and some of the toolkits and some of the things they did. But ultimately, it's good to know attribution so that we can maybe understand directly, the indicators of compromise of future attacks like that. But our main focus was really just kind of understanding the situation and kind of moving in, and also there was contact with, on the dark net with people who claimed to have taken our data and things like that. So it helps to know who you're dealing with, but at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out, what you have, that kind of thing. And
so take me back to when you first learned of that security incident. What was running through your mind?
So the timing was interesting. It was right around Christmas holiday time.
Always is.
Yeah, so timing will generally not be in your favor. You can't count on that. But of course, it'll happen during holidays and times where security teams may be not running with a full crew of people, et cetera. But we had security leaders in town to celebrate the holiday and all this other stuff. And so we'd been going out to dinner. We had a great time in New York City. And of course, we get back, and I'm dropping off my boss at his hotel, and he looks at his phone. He's like, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be a long night." And so, the timing was not great. And so we had a lot of security leaders there, but they had to leave on international flights and stuff. So, timing was really bad. But we mobilized really quickly, and I think that we were able to, start the communications outward and start to really be transparent about what was going on. And it was, so just to recap really quickly, we had somebody who gained internal access through phishing one of our customers, one of our employees, and they gained access to some of the, customer metadata, but not the actual databases. And so they had a certain amount of time inside of the internal network to be able to, our internal applications in order to try and see things, but thankfully the incursion was pretty limited.
So how much planning and preparedness goes into the inevitable anticipation of a cyber attack that you hope will never happen, but may inevitably will?
So I've been at Mongo for 4.5 years, and it had been almost 4 years until something of this magnitude had happened. And I think we had done a good job with like pushing everyone to SSO and a lot of those other hygiene things. Unfortunately, transitioning in between policies and things, I think the attacker kind of got lucky and kind of found a place where our policy hadn't been applied yet, and so they were able to get through. But I would say that we also have a security champions program at MongoDB that Lena Smart started a few years ago. And thankfully, because of this program and the high awareness that our employees have, the social engineering aspect of this attack last year was, I think, cut short by people who are highly security aware and were able to say, hey, why is this person talking to me like this, getting me to do this type of thing? So awareness is hugely important, and it could have been a lot worse unless we had invested a little bit more in kind of communicating that security culture outward.
So it sounded like MongoDB obviously had an incident response plan, and that helped. In terms of the sorts of threats and the cyber attacks that you're seeing at Marqeta, are you thinking about these same sorts of potential incidents and the attack vectors as well?
Absolutely. One of my personal passion areas is around the concept of cyber resilience. Making sure that your security incident response function is pre-coordinated with your crisis management, business continuity, disaster recovery, legal, and PR functions, because you're all going to have to work together so very closely in a situation as described. And also ensuring effective retainers are in place. You don't want to be dealing with contractual redlining in the midst of a response. Make sure you have an incident response and forensics retainer in place. Make sure you have a crisis communication firm retainer, and those are only as good as you invest in wargaming and building out the specific crisis communication plans with them. So make sure you invest in that. Make sure you have a ransomware negotiation retainer, because you don't know if that might be in your future or not, and you don't want to be having to figure out how to set up crypto payments in the moment, or how to reach out to them and negotiate the time that you have to pay ransom to give you more time to assess your situation. There's so much we can do to empower ourselves, and these things don't cost a lot of money. They're just preparations that we have to make sure we're looking further down the road to make.
So what stopped this cyber attack at MongoDB becoming a real disaster for your company?
So thankfully, even though it was a phishing attack against one of our employees, they were only able to get that one session, but it made us hyper aware of all the sessions that SSO allows any employee to use. And so, thankfully they got in once, and they were only able to live off of the longest session of any one of our applications in the back end. And so, they went for a popular communication platform, and it made us really hyper aware of the ability to know how long each session is granted for. But we realized at a certain point their time had run out, and they had kind of no ability to get more information. So thankfully, we had found all their sessions, we had stopped them, and so we had a high degree of certainty that no other indicators of compromise amongst other employees or systems. And knowing when data is being exfiltrated is hugely important. And so being able to move, generate large reports, being able to move gigabytes of data outside of the data boundary, those are worthwhile investments, because you see that happening. It doesn't matter if it's a malicious insider or a threat or whatever, it kind of looks the same. And so being able to have that tooling in place helps us kind of respond to that quicker.
And when you have reporters like me who ask questions like, do you have evidence of a data breach? And they say, we have no evidence of a data breach. It may well be that they have no evidence to begin with. They don't have the logging in place to even know that they've been compromised potentially.
And that's one of the worst situations to be in when you're a security, whenever you don't have that base truth to say, we can't even start to begin a probability of, what the depth of the intrusion is and things like that. That's a terrible situation to be in. And I've seen, I think Google Cloud, Zach, you wrote on that about they've lost a few days of logs recently. Not having that base information can really kind of stymie a lot of information that's based off of that.
So we really do have a lot of reliance and dependence on so many other tools, platforms, vendors. We have hosted email, Slacks. it's a huge attack surface, and obviously we rely on others to secure that as well. What advice or first priorities would you give, Heather, for new security teams?
So specifically to like the third-party ecosystem, I think that the most important advice that I would give is to get back to the basics with business impact analysis. Understand your most critical business processes and which third parties, whether that be SaaS vendors, vendors running your data centers, other vendors providing services that are involved in executing those critical business processes, and you should have your most critical vendors defined based off of the business processes they run for you. And for those vendors, we need to be doing joint readiness exercises. We need to be talking about the type of decisions we're making within our security programs. We can't keep that behind a veil. We'll all make better decisions if we're sharing what we know. There's been so much emphasis on these depersonalized security questionnaires in the third-party risk management space. But the things that you can learn from speaking security practitioner to security practitioner with your third parties is so much more impactful than these security questionnaires. So I would say, spend some time getting to know them and prepare with them.
And also, to the earlier point that you made, Darren, often threat actors will go for the communication platforms if they can, because where secrets are held. Can you tell us a little bit, from your perspective, in terms of what companies should be doing in terms of trying to protect their communication platforms in case they're compromised, and how should security teams communicate if their tools are compromised?
That's a really good question. And Heather was talking a bit about resiliency. And unfortunately, some of these platforms, they're kind of single points of like the company does business through this thing. Unfortunately, whenever you suspect one of these platforms may be compromised, you might have to jump to a whole different thing and onboard a bunch of users to a different place so that you can at least rule out kind of a deep infiltration in some of your main things. The way that we can monitor some of those communications platforms, I think, might be aided by automation, where you have kind of an understanding about the content within each channel and making sure that you apply principle of least privilege to, okay, so this is a channel talking about a certain project or whatever. Make sure that only people on that project can see it. Now, easier said than done with kind of the self-organization that goes on these platforms, but using automation to understand where sensitive data is being talked about and making sure that you're scoping that access as much as possible. Can you stop people from doing it? Maybe not, but I think that at least having awareness is the first step.
Same question, Heather. In terms of having your communications platform potentially compromised, how then can security teams communicate securely with each other from that point on?
I think the how is so much easier than the when, if I'm being honest. The how can be as simple as having designated a specific encrypted messaging app on security team members' phones that you plan to go to in the event that you suspect in-band communications are compromised, or it can be as robust as having a separate instance of Office 365 or a secondary G Suite instance for specific people that would be likely to be involved in such response. I've seen enterprises have that just at the waiting. There's also crisis communication platforms specific for these type of events, and so you can plan ahead for all of that and include it in your cyber incident response plan, which, by the way, everybody on your team should have printed out, because once again, you might have a situation where you don't have access to your document repositories if things are, encrypted, et cetera. And so making sure that they know their checklist of where they go and who they contact and the steps that they need to take. Even for your retained responders that might help you is really critical. But the when to move to out-of-band communications, that's the really challenging part. It's sometimes you suspect, but you don't know. And nowadays, with these internal messaging applications we all use at work, many team members like to do things like change their their name on those messaging apps to something more personal. Just that one very benign feature could allow someone with access to change their name to your CEO's name, right? So things like that can make it very hard to discern if the communication has been, if the communication platform has been truly impacted because it looks legitimate at first. So these type of things are difficult.
You mentioned that transparency is so important in incidents like this, and I think with MongoDB's incident, transparency was really clear there. You know, I think you kind of explained the situation as you knew it when you knew it. What are you doing differently now following that incident?
So thankfully, we haven't had anything quite as large as that event, but we have gotten better at kind of those muscles around crisis communication and involving legal at the right time and formalizing a lot of the things that we had discovered and not having something that large for a few years. I think we're in a lot better place. And also, the follow-on effect in kind of the way that the attacker was able to get in, we've since addressed through policy and through kind of stronger protections in IDP, making sure that that same threat model would not succeed again. And we're also a lot more aware of the surface area for which we can be, talked through. Our employees, a third party was actually compromised, and that's how we were, attacked. And it was not expected, I think, for us. And so we had trusted this third party, and of course, they were themselves a victim, and that we became a victim. So I think that we're a lot more aware of our internals. We've done a great job, I think, of trying to scope down access literally as much as possible through human means and automated means. And so principle of least privilege is definitely going to reduce our exposure for going forward.
So this year obviously has been year of the data breach. We've seen some of the biggest data breaches of all time. With Marqeta, have you learned from some of the things that you've seen, some of the data breaches out there with other companies? Have you taken on board what you've seen out there and applied some of those protections or changes to your own company?
Absolutely. One of the biggest focus areas I have right now with regards to what I'm learning from external to Marqeta is with regards to how to train our HR recruitment functions on how to spot these North Korean IT workers applying for IT positions. And so that is a big concern at the moment. As I mentioned, 300 plus companies have been victimized thus far. And so that's just one example of how you see what's going on for other people, and then you say, okay, what can we do to educate ourselves? And to Darren's point, so much of it is about the security awareness, right? Training a muscle to be on the lookout for these type of activities for recruitment teams, for example, having very targeted and specific security awareness training to talk about how be suspicious even of third-party received emails, right, is very, very key. So continuing to develop those targeted awareness campaigns based off of what we're seeing, I think is oftentimes even more important than some of the technical control implementation, because technical controls will always fail as well.
So what is old is new again, but there are new technologies and threats. With the North Korean example, deepfakes is actually a big part of that, using AI to create fake imagery or fake people to trick others into thinking that they are someone else. What else is at the top of your security worry list?
I think for me right now, at the top of my security worry list is how segmented and decentralized the identity security ecosystem of technology is from the data security ecosystem of technology. To Darren's earlier point, identity security is such an important area to get key signals on how access could be anomalously leveraged. And that's very difficult to do if you have all of these different providers for identity governance, privilege access, endpoint privilege management, entitlement management, and data loss prevention, when really we need to be able to put together the equation across all of those tools of this person anomalously requested this entitlement at this odd time from this odd geo for this data that they don't normally access. Like, that's a difficult trail of breadcrumbs to stitch together, and one that we need our technology providers to do a better job communicating to each other and making it easier for us to stitch that story together.
Yeah. And very much the same question for you, Darren, as well. You know, in terms of like what you're seeing, you know, what do you think could be what we could be doing better in terms of identity protection?
I think that there's still some friction, well, not friction, but I think there's still pushback on some of the inconveniences that come through all these multi-factor biometric point of presence pushes and things that, oh, every single app is going to force me to re-sign in or to use an authorized device. I think that unfortunately, it's still a necessity to kind of inject a little bit more of that inconvenience to make things more secure, or a lot more secure. I don't think that it's necessarily a human problem, and I think that technology is making this faster, right? You know, my phone can quickly scan my face, and I can just get on with my day. I'm not typing in as many passwords, and I'm not mistyping them or typing into the wrong place. So I think that top of mind for me is still very much actually the North Korean thing in terms of nation states getting into it, and usually the advice is if a nation state wants to get into your system, they will. But now they're targeting much smaller companies, or much smaller companies are finding them. And so it's a different game with people who are working with you now and might be a nation state and will monetize their access. And they'll get a salary too, and they'll send it back. But you know, I would say that it's a much different vector for you know, employment and onboarding and all those things.
So look, we have a few minutes left on the clock. I want to note that security is a real challenge, but it's also very, very rewarding. For the folks in the audience, Heather, what's the best thing about being a CISO?
I think it's about how passionate people are in this space and how willing they are to help each other do the right thing and teach other people to do the right thing. There's nothing better than being on a team of people that are willing to put down what they're working on for a moment to answer your question, because they have just that missing puzzle piece of knowledge that they're so excited to share with you. And it's that passion for the space that keeps us going, because otherwise this can be a really demoralizing effort if you're not passionate about it. And so for me, it's creating that teaming culture where everyone feels like they can ask anyone a question and share their knowledge, and in an egoless environment.
And I think diversity is a big part of that, and having people from different backgrounds and different areas and expertise as well to help with security problems that change every day.
Absolutely. As mentioned earlier, I think embracing neurodiverse talent is incredibly important to the fight for cybersecurity, as well as diversity across all different verticals, because we get such better ideas when we're all looking at the problem from different angles, because otherwise we're all just seeing the same side of the problem. So yeah, creating that high performing team culture is absolutely required for us to be successful in this fight.
And for you, Darren, what gets you excited about work every morning?
I think my teammates and the people that I deal with, and kind of that excitement around security is really great to be able to use. Computers were one way, but now we're in social engineering, now we're in deepfakes. It's this wide variety of things, and of course it can be overwhelming, but it's a challenge as well. And I really enjoy that challenge and trying to be, one step ahead of whatever's about to happen, and build technology to make it safer for everybody.
And you're still learning new things every day?
Nonstop. Honestly, learning has been way more now with AI and things, just to teach myself, and so it's been great.
See, security isn't all doom and gloom after all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.